All right, hello and welcome to another expert interview. My name is John Golden from SalesPOP Online Sales Magazine and Pipeliner CRM. And today I'm joined by Spencer Marona. How are you doing, Spencer?
I'm doing great, John. Thanks for having me on again. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to continue to talk about value quotient, okay? We're going to talk about this from Axiogenics, if I'm correct, right?
Correct.
Linking thinking to performance, and this is something that Spencer does. He runs these, take these assessments, and then he runs these reports and reviews them with you to get an idea of what your value judgment quotient is. So before we begin, just quickly, VQ versus IQ versus EQ. What's the difference?
So with IQ, it's your intelligence quotient, and your IQ pretty much stays the same throughout your entire life.
I don't know about that. I think mine has gone down a little over the years.
Touche. I'm probably in the same boat with you on that. And with EQ, it's your emotional intelligence. It's Daniel Goleman, I believe, coined that 20 years ago or so, and that's really been a big thing with leaders with emotional intelligence in regards to being able to handle yourself properly when handle yourself properly, when conflict arises, being able to really keep a level head and reading people's moods, emotions, body language, and VQ is value judgment intelligence quotient. So VQ is about your ability to make decisions based off of the value you perceive for yourself or that you're going to be giving someone else.
Excellent. So the report that you have to do the assessment, the report's really split into two parts, right? Your worldview and your self-view.
Correct.
So it's how you perceive the world looking externally and then how you perceive yourself looking internally. Yeah?
Yes, correct.
Okay. So let's talk. So let's go through. You did a report for me. So let's go through some of the worldview section. So nurturing others, right? Number one, why is that important to have a good score? And what are some of the upsides, downsides of this?
Sure. Well, so nurturing others for the hierarchy of value, that is the most important value, the highest value that you can have. And it's about life. It's about appreciating the quality of someone's life. And it's an intrinsic view on the world. So what's important about nurturing others is at 100%, when you or someone is coming from this perspective, when you're thinking from this perspective, you have an incredible way of putting yourself in their shoes, being empathetic, seeing things from their point of view. When you can't overvalue nurturing others. That's another thing. A lot of these you can overvalue, you can undervalue. Right. If you are undervaluing nurturing others, that's not necessarily a bad thing. These reports aren't about fixing something that is broken. It's about recognizing and being mindful of a cognitive liability or an asset. But undervaluing nurturing others, that's basically saying that there are certain times, if you were to come from that point of view, if it were to be a cognitive liability, you might have more of a, not you specifically because it's an asset, but someone may have a difficult time being empathetic, seeing things from someone else's point of view. Because, in business today, in sales or in leadership and management, it's so easy to get caught up into the processes and to have meetings and to see sales team members as profit centers. But we're humans at the end of the day. Customers, clients, we're humans at the end of the day. So coming from this perspective in a business context really is about creating the greatest net value between you and that other person.
And it's fair to say that this is a major element of trust building, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Another one that I found interesting here is appreciating the quality of things. And one of the items that says, coming from this perspective, sometimes people spend too much time focused on making things perfect rather than getting them done. And this, for me, is one of those classic paradoxes or things that you have to deal with often in the workplace is, a lot of people proclaim to be perfectionists, right? So they don't want to finish anything until it's 100%. I've always come from the 80% school of thought that when something's 80% ready, it's ready, because the extra 20% usually has no value for the customer. And often I think perfectionism is a kind of a defense mechanism, because if you're always trying to perfect something, you never have to put it out there, right?
Right.
So talk a little bit about appreciating the quality of things.
Yes, this is an interesting perspective, and your score is at 91%. So it's, I think I made the analogy last time we spoke that a cognitive liability is very similar to a credit card. So this isn't a concern by any means, but what we see with appreciating the quality of things when it is undervalued, for example, that would be someone who maybe has a really difficult time going to the museum or going to a play and enjoying that, or maybe they walk the hall of the museum and they're kind of done. Okay, but let's talk about this in business context. Often you'll see leaders, if they undervalue this, they have a really hard time appreciating the work and effort that one of their team members is doing and putting into it. They may want to just say, okay, hey, let me get it done, because they know they can get it done faster, instead of empowering others to continue to do whatever that task or objective may be. If someone was to overvalue appreciating the quality of things, then they're probably paying way too much time and attention, depending on how far they overvalue it, on the quality of something. They could be very materialistic. They could be very into they could be essentially taking materials and objects and placing a lot of intrinsic value in them, which becomes a value distortion.
Yeah, and here's another one. So following rules and policies, right? So again, this is another one where there's a little bit of a balancing act, isn't there? Because let's face it, we are bombarded every day with stories about innovative companies and breaking the mold and turning things on its side and being like, breakout thinking and all of this. And it all tends to, or people perceive that to mean it's like throw out all the rules and just, free form everything. But as we know, I mean, that's not a reality. So when you have too much or too less of this, I mean, maybe you're too rigid on one side, and then maybe you're just too free form on the other. And yeah, you might come up with great ideas, but you can never scale them or make them work, right?
Right. So there's a cost to that, right? So there's a cost if you are you're an innovator, you're an entrepreneur, and we'll often see following rules and policies with creative people. What's interesting also on your report is exploring possibilities is very far to the right, is an overvalue. So that actually makes sense. I mean, you are, in my opinion, you're a thought leader. You're doing a lot of incredible things, but you're constantly pushing the envelope. And so if you're constantly pushing the envelope, it's really hard to imagine someone overvaluing rules and policies, because sometimes you need to see how far you can bend and break to make things happen.
And I like this other one here too. Seeking common ground, right? I mean, that's an interesting one. What people think or believe is their own business, as long as they don't impose their beliefs on me, or may underestimate or be indifferent to the value of seeking common ground. I think that's an interesting one, because I think it's always a challenge when you have different personalities, different people who have different ways of doing things. I don't think finding common ground is difficult, especially for maybe the more type A personalities, if you like.
For sure. Seeking common ground it can be very challenging for some people. And let's say that, for example, and again, this is really a very minor cognitive liability on your report, but let's say that someone undervalued seeking common ground, and they were difficult in meetings, or they were just difficult to get along with, and they were always basically okay with saying, let's just agree to disagree. So that necessarily doesn't really get people anywhere at times. It doesn't create a lot of value. There are times for that, absolutely. But what's nice about this, and with the coaching that I'm doing, is it's recognizing if that was a cognitive liability, and then coming from a perspective like nurturing others. So for example, with nurturing others, each cognitive asset has what are called centering questions. And the centering questions help put your mind right in the right frame to think from that perspective. And the questions for centering others are, what is this person feeling or experiencing right now? What would it be like to be in their shoes, living their life? What really matters to them? How can I make the biggest difference for them in this moment? What is good or unique about them that is worthy of appreciation? So part of this process is, as I mentioned a moment ago, identifying that cognitive liability, and then figuring out through several weeks of coaching, what is the right cognitive asset from when you were triggered to leverage your asset so you can think and utilize your best thinking in all circumstances that matter.
Yeah, no, I agree. And the last one that I'm going to deal with on this one, I think, is applying order and structure. Because here's another one. Because I mean, I've been thinking about this a lot recently, because there is always that dynamic between, as you say here, the only way to get things done and to scale them and sustain them is to have a systemic approach, step by step, right? However, the flip side of that is people can spend too much time designing the perfect process, right, and never actually get anything done. And and I've been through in my career, I've had there's a lot of things that shaped my thinking. One was I did lean office training at one stage at the University of Michigan, which really was a great way of saying, yes, you need process for sure, but you can make that process as customer oriented and as simple as possible. That should be your goal. And when you lay out processes properly, you actually, lay them out on the wall with sticky notes. You suddenly realize how crazy some of your processes are. And
right.
Something that something that only takes a couple of hours actually in reality takes 2 months to deliver, like crazy stuff like this.
For sure.
And I just think that paradox again is like, and there was another time when I used to work somewhere where, as you said, sometimes I would come up with the idea. So I bring the people in the room and I'd look on the whiteboard and I'd whiteboard out, here's what I think we should do, blah, blah, blah. And then I would hand over the whiteboard marker to the guy who was the operational guy, and I would say, okay. And then I'd leave the room and I'd turn it over to them, and I knew they would come up with how to actually operationalize this, because I knew that wasn't going to I wasn't going to add a lot of value in that circumstance. I'd be better off taking myself out of the room.
Isn't that funny how sometimes just getting out of the way is the most successful route? No, I understand.
Yeah. So talk about a little bit about that conflict or around order and structure as opposed to momentum.
Sure. I mean, order and structure is obviously important for any company to have, and there's, I think, the biggest challenge that companies are having today is defining what that order and structure is as they want to scale, but also putting in processes and systems to be adaptable. Because if you do have so much order and structure in place, with the rate of speed of change today in the business environment, you have to be adaptable. You have to be flexible. And what does that mean? It means communication. It means understanding the way different people may think, and understanding that empowering others, seeking common ground. You mentioned a moment ago, but the opposite is if you do not apply order and structure, we end up with chaos, and we end up with misunderstanding on roles, responsibilities, silos, and none of those are good for companies or individuals.
Yeah. So let's move to this. Let's move to the second part. So SelfView, right? Mm-hmm. And this is something. I mean, I think if you look at the two parts, right, there's worldview, and it's in some ways, when you're managing people or organizations, and that it's. You can adapt to people's worldviews, and you can understand it, and you can sometimes guide them, etc., etc. For me, it has always been the toughest part is how people perceive themselves, right? Self-awareness. That's for me. I mean, if somebody lacks self-awareness, or if somebody perceives themselves in a completely different way than you and most other people perceive them, that's a really tough one. So I think this part here, your self-view is critically important, that I do think people should spend more time maybe investigating. So here's the first one, right? Enjoying who you are. You talk about why it's important to enjoy who you are.
Well, enjoying who you are essentially means through this is it's being able to see from that perspective, being able to take time out for yourself to nourish yourself. Typically, this is an interesting one. Typically, when we see this undervalued, and you cannot overvalue enjoying who you are, because it's an intrinsic perspective. But when we see this dramatically undervalued, it really means two things typically. Either something pretty traumatic may have happened in someone's life at a very early age. They could be a victim. It could be some type of, maybe they were a victim or went through some racism, a lot of different things. But that's not always the case. We also see this far to the left if someone's gone through a recent traumatic experience, losing a job, losing a big deal, going through a divorce. And it's what's interesting, though, is I've done a lot of these assessments, and when I see enjoying who you are far to the left at times, then I know something's up, something we want to talk about them. It could be a self-esteem issue. But you'll also find that a lot of people will still have valuing yourself at 100%.
Right.
And valuing yourself at 100% is they understand that they have intrinsic value. They mean something, that their life has a purpose, but they're just not happy with who they are and what they're about at that given time. But they have the confidence. So it's more of a self-esteem versus confidence, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I like that. And I was going to ask about the valuing yourself, but I think you've just answered that. So that's really about, and I like this part here where it says, it's important to forgive myself, to learn from my mistakes, to embrace my strengths, to keep improving, to make my life better. And whatever I've done or not done in the past is not reflective of who I am today. For me, that's a really important sentence because let's face it, I mean, we all carry baggage with us and we all carry baggage into the workplace, right?
For sure.
And often the situations and issues that come up in the workplace, a lot of times, have nothing to do with the workplace. They have to do with previous experience. I mean, one recently where, a company was going to do something, and there was pushback from the head of the department that wanted to do it, that they wanted to do that thing, and it turns out that the pushback actually didn't come from this situation, came back from a situation earlier in their career when they were, asked to do something like this and it didn't work out, and they felt they got the blame for it or whatever. So they were, and this was a long time back in their career, right?
Right.
But yet it suddenly manifested itself again.
No, absolutely. And we could probably tell a couple hundred more stories similar like that with personal and professional. But and that's what's interesting about this is that a lot of the cognitive liabilities, primarily, we are operating on autopilot most of the time. And we got nearly 50,000 thoughts a day, and 95% of them are non-conscious. And so when something like that happens, that you had just mentioned, that stays with someone unless they do the work, become self-aware, become mindful, and it's learning a new way of thinking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that the outcome isn't always going to be the same, especially because you can actually bring some experience to the table. So here's another one: seeking fulfillment, right? And this is something that you hear a lot about now. And people have said generational studies, and everybody wants to feel fulfilled in what they're doing. And let's face it. Work a lot of the time is work. It's called work for a reason. I always laugh when I see things like seeking fulfillment and stuff. I think, my dad, God rest his soul, I doubt anybody asked him throughout his whole career, are you feeling fulfilled?
Right.
And because, people didn't do that, but it's become more of a thing. So talk about the seeking fulfillment part.
Yeah, seeking fulfillment is it's interesting, and a number of people undervalue this, and a lot of it often has to do, and sometimes they may not be where they may be very happy on the surface. They may show up to work and seem happy, but they often feel that there's a gap between where they are and where they think they should be or ought to be. Mm-hmm. And as a result, they may be at a job that they love. They may be at a company that's working great, but they're still not happy enough with themselves. And as a result, they're not feeling fulfilled. They undervalue this perspective.
And then I just got a couple more to go through.
Sure.
But one I wanted to do here was, let me see, staying focused, because this is a huge thing on that I talk about a lot, the idea of focus. And I think it's today, we get easily distracted. We perceive ourselves to be more busy than anybody in the whole history of mankind ever was. But if you really analyzed how busy we are, you think, well, yes, you're very busy, but you're busy letting yourself get distracted by a lot of things that probably don't, have as great an importance as you put on them, right?
For sure.
So talk about this staying focused thing, because I find that this is really difficult for people, because focus requires choice, right? Because when you focus on something, you unfocus on other things, right? And you put priority on something, and people generally don't like to make choices if they can help it.
Absolutely. I mean, we're wired to preserve our energy, and this is I'm glad that you brought this one up, because just particularly with sales professionals, mm-hmm. When you're undervaluing staying focused, it's a lack of prioritization. You're having a hard time with your time management. Mm-hmm. You're running around all over the place. Where the opposite of overvaluing is someone who pays way too much attention, maybe to a certain task or objective, that other things start to falter as a result. And I agree with you in that there is so much information today. There's buyers who are making decisions faster. There's so much happening out there, but it is absolutely about choice, and it's not easy. I mean, it sounds simple, but simple isn't always easy. Yeah. And it's about eliminating distractions, and it's not only about eliminating distractions, but it's about working smart. I mean, people say, work smarter, not harder. You got to work hard. I mean, today we need to work hard, but we need to be smart about how we work, and we need to be smart about where we put our attention and focus on. Are we busy or are we productive? Two totally different things, right? So that's a very interesting one.
And I think it's interesting too, as you say, because of the idea of choice. Because I mean, I always say to people is, if you put somebody in front of three doors, right, and you say choose a door to walk through, they'll choose one door. Eventually they'll choose one door. If you put 8 doors in front of them, they won't choose any normal, because they get paralyzed by there's too many choices, right?
You're absolutely right. Yeah.
So it's interesting. So the last one I'm just going to deal here is being resilient, because I think this is a good one, particularly as it pertains to sales and salespeople. Because if there's one thing that salespeople really need is a high level of resilience, because let's face it, they get more objections and no's, and they get the economy suddenly decides to tank. Well, now thankfully it's on the pickup, so hopefully they're getting the other flip side of that. But resilience is key. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, resilience is a really interesting one, and I agree 100%. It's extremely important, particularly in sales, to be resilient, to have grit, to learn to be able to bounce back and keep moving forward. But there's 25% of the people who take this assessment undervalue being resilient, and when you're undervalue being resilient, essentially you can appear unmotivated, indifferent, frustrated, although you may think you're appearing to be tolerant, pragmatic, and cooperative. When someone overvalues being resilient, they may be hiding something else. By overvaluing being resilient, you're often not looking at all the potential outcomes on how they can maybe come out. And 61% overvalue this. So it's not uncommon for people to overvalue being resilient. And the challenge with overvaluing being resilient is someone like yourself may think that you're coming off as results oriented, pragmatic, getting done, dedicated, tenacious. But on the flip side, others could see you as impatient, intolerant, strong-headed, bullheaded, but you're being resilient. I'm trying to get this done. And at the end of the day, that can be challenging. And so if someone did have this as an undervalue or overvalue, and whatever that trigger was, and they recognized, okay, I'm triggered right now, I need to be resilient, they would want to find another cognitive asset that would help them put them in a better frame of mind and thinking.
Yeah. Well, the good thing is, thankfully, I've never been accused of being strong-headed or anything like that.
No,
honestly. Okay, so here, and I'll put this up properly on the video later, but you get, at the end of it, you get a summary. So just talk a little bit, Spencer, in the last couple of moments. Tell them a little bit more about yourself and how they can take, how the audience can take one of these assessments if they would like, and it turns into a big, 48-page assessment here. So tell them how they can do that.
Sure. So they can go to my website, which is performnorth.com. And I'm a certified cognitive self-leadership coach, neuroaxiological cognitive remodeling technology practitioner, huge word, but yeah, certified self-leadership coach. The nice thing about this assessment is that it is scientifically validated. It is measurable and it's objective, and it literally should take maybe 10 minutes or less to take. You rank a set of words and a set of phrases as to what has the most value to you. So the nice thing is it's not subjective. It's not like a personality test where you can answer the question the way you think it maybe needs to be answered. As soon as someone takes that assessment, I am notified, and I'll send them their introductory report, which covers 3 out of the 36 cognitive biases. I'm happy to do a free coaching session to walk someone through that report, and it's really for anyone, whether it is a sales professional, a sales leader. We're working with several executive teams right now, or if it is a stay-at-home mom or dad. This process is about learning to engage in your best thinking in really any circumstance that matters. And it all boils down to what is known as the central question. That's what Axiogenics is about. And the central question is, what choice can I make, and action can I take in this moment to create the greatest net value? So if there's anything that I can really emphasize to take away today, if that's the one thing people remember, write that down on a 3x5 business card, put it on your laptop, put it in your car. What choice can I make and action can I take in this moment to create the greatest net value? And that will start putting you into a generating value mindset, and you will see improvements.
Fantastic. Well, it's been great. And I really would recommend people to take the test, because I think the more aware we are of ourselves, the better it is for not just for work, but for life in general. So listen, thanks again, Spencer.
Thank you, John.
Spencer Marona.
Appreciate it.
My name is John Golden, SalesPOP Online Sales Magazine and Pipeline of CRM. This is another expert interview, and we'll see you all again soon.
Thanks.